Welcome to session 2.2. This session will familiarize you with the heart of the TGM preparation phase, the six-step approach. By using this six-step approach, you will work towards an objective assessment supported by well-designed measurements. This session is targeted at trial organizers. It is also advised for practitioners, solution providers, and developers or technicians. The focus is on the structure of the TGM, the idea behind measuring innovation, creating scenarios that enable measurements, and all 6 steps and how to follow them.
This session will be about the second part of the preparation phase, namely the six-step approach. After the contextualization of your gaps, remember step 0, you're ready to start designing your trial. First, we give a little introduction towards robust assessment. Then, we jump into the six-step approach, consisting of steps on the trial objective, research question, data collection plan, evaluation approaches and metrics, scenario formulation, and solution selection. Finally, we give further support information on which sessions can help you during the six-step approach. We start with robust assessment. You might think, after the identification of your gap and the trial context, you can easily assess whether a provided solution is good or bad based on your experience. This may be true, but we often encounter a lack of understanding as to why the six-step approach and the full trail guidance methodology should be used. It is because you do not just want to tell your supervisor that this solution feels good or bad. Your supervisor wants to hear whether and how much it helps you to do your job better. Does it bridge this gap you keep on mentioning? You must deliver facts and have hard, reliable data at hand, because in the end, the supervisor needs to explain to the taxpayer why money was spent on that new equipment which is now only used rarely. This is why we need robust assessment. Gut feeling is just not good enough. And this is why we need reference data, because measuring actually means compare to a reference. But we talk about this on the next slide. So how can this kind of data be collected? On the one hand, observations. You can keep the time or have experts filling in questionnaires, or you can host a focus group. On the other hand, logging data. Driver Plus has developed software tools that can help you with this. Check out session 5.2 about the testbed technical infrastructure for more information. So, how to measure? Measuring actually only means that you compare the object of interest with something of which you really know how large, heavy, dry, or whatever it is. So measuring means to identify a quantitative fact about an object of interest by comparing it to a fixed unit. Let's say your object of interest is a coin. Your fixed unit can be a measure in centimeter, and the quantitative fact that you can draw from this comparison is that the coin is 16 millimeters wide. But sometimes you do not have such a fixed unit. Then you can just declare something as a fixed unit. If you have 2 coins, you might declare one of them as a verified reference. Then you can draw valid conclusions about the other coin, always in relation to that verified reference. You can say coin A is bigger than coin B. Now let's try to find an example that is more related to crisis management. Suppose you work for the ambulance service. Someone who has had a car accident is trying to reach you because he needs medical help. Unfortunately, the person in need cannot describe his current location clearly. So the object of interest might be the time until he is found and rescued, either using your standard way of communicating, the 112 call, or using an innovative app that automatically tells the current location via GPS and further needed information on the person in need. But anyhow, the quantitative fact would be defined in minutes and seconds, preferably not in hours. So what about that fixed unit to compare this to? Well, you have 3 options. A. You have real, historic data about such an incident. B. You can reenact the incident in a real-life simulation. We call this playing the baseline. More on this in session 5.4. C. You can digitally simulate the incident in a virtual environment. Now, these different possibilities come with different challenges. If we stick to our example, we need someone to mimic the injured person in need. Yes, this is possible, but not only difficult to measure. It can also be quite dangerous, for example, if the accident happened on a street with a lot of traffic. Simulating a person in need in a more controlled setting, like a private street without traffic, is already a lot safer. You could also simulate it in a digital simulation, for instance, by providing a three-dimensional computer world in which the rescuers can drive the ambulance virtually. You only have to question whether the simulation actually reflects the real situation adequately. But, however you decide, two things are always key. First, you have to trigger points in your scenario that lead to the key events in which your gap occurs. Only if this specific context is given, you can get the data you need. And second, the main question always is, how does the innovative solution change the gap process? So you need to double-check your trigger points. Always make sure that your trigger points create the environment you need to be able to measure what you want to measure. This was a short introduction to robust assessment. Now back to the preparation phase and the 6-step approach. The 6 steps are setting trial objectives, defining the research questions, drafting a data collection plan, selecting evaluation approaches, formulating a scenario, and selecting the solutions to assess. On the next slides, we will quickly visit each of those steps. Each step is also described in the TGM handbook, and during the contact phase, we will dive deep into each step. We will start with setting trial objective and defining the research questions.
Episode 12, 6-step approach, setting the trial objectives. In a joint meeting with your entire 4-man trial committee, you define the trial objective as SMART as possible, meaning specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Your objective is that you are looking for assistance to take a better informed decision on evacuation, and specifically the prioritization of this evacuation. The measurable quantities in this objective are time, how many resources are needed, cost effectiveness, and the amount of work done by responders in the field. Is this objective achievable and relevant? Yes, because you focus on a small area and you limit the scope of the trial. Yes, because you try to improve a specific element of crisis management, namely the decision-making regarding evacuation during floods and optimizing this evacuation. Episode 13, 6-step approach, stating the research question. The research question is easy, don't you think so? You define it like this. Can more detailed information increase the efficiency of evacuation in case of a flood? You feel you can work with this research question because it is specific for the context of your trial. It can be answered by acting out the current procedures and emergency plans, being the baseline, and comparing this with managing the simulated crisis while using the innovative solutions, being the innovation line. And you can work with it because the sentence is formulated like a question you need to answer and ends with a question mark.
Step 1. Setting the trial objective. In a nutshell, an objective is defined as something that one's efforts or actions are intended to obtain or accomplish. Purpose, goal, target. So, coming from your gaps and the trial context, now you have to clearly define your trial objectives in a smart way. This is the prerequisite for formulating clear research questions. So if you remember session 2.1 about the step 0, when starting with the 6-step approach, you have already identified one or more gaps and analyzed the trial context. Since step 0 was a lot like an open brainstorm, at this stage you have a lot of possibilities. So what shall it be in the end? In this step, identify your trial objective. You first decide on maybe 1 or 2 or even more gaps you want to focus your trial on. Make sure this is feasible with respect to your human and practical resources. Also, you have to consider the character of your gap. If it involves a mass collusion, this might be a huge event. If it is only about finding a better way to communicate the location of a person in need, like in our example, it will involve less people and equipment. An objective is a result to be achieved, so you need to brainstorm what you really want to achieve with your trial and try to formulate this in one sentence. As heard before, this formulation should be SMART. You need to be specific about what you want to address. Your desired improvement has to be measurable. It has to be achievable to actually address the gap in your trial. Be reasonable about the desired improvement and the required resources for the trial. Last but not least, you need to define how much time you are able and willing to spend in order to prepare, execute, and evaluate the trial. In the trial objective step, your inputs are your gaps and trial context. Your outputs will be one or more SMART trial objectives. The methods for the trial objective step are brainstorming and discussion. The tools are pen and paper, mind maps, SMART definition, trial guidance tool, and the trial action plan. The checklist for your trial objective step is: write down the aim or goal for improvement per gap. Each objective is formulated in a SMART way. Discuss the SMART objectives with practitioners. Ensure the objectives are all feasible. Formulate and discuss the overall objective of the trial, the slogan. After we set our trial objective, we come to step 2, formulating research questions. In a nutshell, by formulating a SMART objective, you've defined what you want to achieve, investigate in your trial. Now you need to formulate research questions that address what you are trying to find out in your trial. The aim of this step is to identify the proper mix of research methods and data analysis techniques, taking the trial context into account. While your trial objectives might seem a little general, now you can go into the detail by formulating research questions. This will help you to identify the data that must be collected. Also, the wording can help you to select the functionality you are actually looking for in an innovative solution. Last but not least, research questions will greatly help you to draw conclusions from your trial by answering these questions in the evaluation phase. Check Session 4.2 for information on the data analysis and Session 4.3 for information on the data synthesis of the evaluation phase. But what makes a good research question? We identified the following criteria which may support your formulation process. 1. Plain and simple. A research question needs to be formulated in a question, so use a question mark. 2. It needs to address a distinct gap of the trial. 3. It needs to cover the 3 dimensions of trials, namely the trial, crisis management, and solution dimension. Remember Session 2.1. 4. It must not be scenario-driven. 5. A research question needs to be answered and measurable by the trial. 6. It needs to be understood and approved by all trial stakeholders. 7. The scenario and the evaluation are research question dependent. 8. A research question can be organized in a multi-level hierarchical structure. 9. It is formulated simple, which does not imply that it is always easy to answer. So a good research question for our ambulance example would be: how can the exact location of a person in need be communicated more quickly to an ambulance? For more support on formulating research questions, check the Trial Guidance tool in Session 5.1. In the research questions step, your inputs are the trial context, the crisis management gaps you choose, and SMART trial objectives. Your outputs will be one or more research questions. The methods for the research question step are workshop and discussions. The tools are physical meeting, teleconferences, min maps, pen and paper, trial guidance tool, and the trial action plan. The checklist for your research question step is: cross-check whether every gap is covered by at least one research question. Check that each research question meets the above-mentioned research question criteria. Check whether each research question is updated with the newest information while following the iterative, co-creative 6-step approach. Now we'll continue with the data collection plan and evaluation approaches and metrics.
Episode 14, 6-step approach, drafting a data collection plan. The TGM focuses on objectiveness and fact-based assessment. So that causes the need of an elaborated data collection plan and a definition of measurement. In any case, the time it takes to evacuate can be measured easily, at least when you can provide realistic calculations or estimations for each part of the area that could potentially be evacuated. Another measurement is the correctness of decisions. The efficiency of evacuation, and thus cost-effectiveness, can be computed. If less people have more time to evacuate, less resources and less effort is required. So, in the trial, you need to set or estimate the number of people evacuated, the area evacuated, and the cost spent on evacuation support such as fuel, consumable goods, direct cost of rescue vehicles, and salaries for the rescue professionals. The usability of solutions can be assessed as well in a qualitative way, for example with the help of a questionnaire. Think of the ease of implementing new solutions in currently operational systems related to IT, procedures, and legal and ethical aspects. "Hey," someone cries out, "these are exactly our key performance indicators, the KPIs we were looking for." Yes, you were right, so please write them down. But how to formulate and how to measure them? And what about the thresholds? Episode 15, 6-Step Approach, Setting the Evaluation Approach and Metrics. It might feel strange to think already about observations and evaluation before you have not even done one practical thing in the trial itself. But be convinced that you are going the right way. If you do not prepare the observations, data collection and evaluation extremely well, you might face problems afterwards. Imagine this. You have executed your trial. You start to evaluate, and you find out you forgot to gather very essential information. Too late to repair this error. So that is why in your preparation phase you should, and must, reflect on the evaluation as early as possible. But you don't have to work alone on this topic. You can involve your team and ask them to choose an evaluation coordinator. The role should focus entirely on evaluation. Together with your evaluation colleague, you decide to phone the TGM expert of a nearby centre of expertise. You ask him, "Evaluation, I know, but what does metrics mean? For a good evaluation, the way to collect data must be prepared. We have just done this job. But metrics, are we talking about thresholds?" The expert replies that this step is about organising the way how to reach real results in measurement and assessments. He states, "A crucial element is that you can compare the results with the current situation, your reference, so the situation without innovative solutions. And yes, you should be able to compare the measured values with thresholds. This will indicate the level of improvements by using the solutions." You thank him, but you also feel that for you it seems to be too early to define thresholds for your KPIs. You realise that they depend on how much the current processes need to change to implement the innovative solutions, and it depends on the scenario. "Are we allowed to do this later?" you ask. The expert replies, "Sure, you can define the KPI thresholds once you have further worked out your evaluation approach and your scenario. But don't forget them, as it is crucial to have them defined in the preparation phase." Now there are at least some things you know about the evaluation approach. Firstly, you need observers. Secondly, within your specific setup, you need to make 2 runs, a baseline run and an innovation line run. "Is the baseline really needed?" another colleague asks you. "It sounds very boring to me." You explain to him that if you could extract enough representative data about how evacuation processes are handled currently, for instance from exercises or real crises that occurred in the past, it would not be needed. But because there is no sufficient historical data available in your organisation, you decide to run the baseline as well. And you should be ready to explain to the participants as well why this extra run is needed. Thirdly, you have heard there are technical tools available to help you in collecting the data you need for evaluation. You would like to use the testbed technical infrastructure to automatically collect as much data as possible. And you would like to hand the observers a software tool to collect electronic observations. But how do all these technical things exactly work? Your colleague is cheering to you. Let's list all these difficult words and look up what it means for our trial. I have the feeling there are many tools and methods to assist in the data collection and evaluation approach. Let's in any case review them.
We come to step 3, setting the data collection plan. In a nutshell, the data collection plan describes how all the data you need will be collected and measured, by whom and by which means during the trial. The structured plan is key to addressing the research questions. A data collection plan is a document in which you write which kind of data you need to measure for which part of your central phenomena, participant and/or site. The starting point to formulating a good data collection plan is the rationale behind it. Ask yourself why you need a specific set of data and for which purposes. The answers should be easily found in the trial objectives and in the research questions. If you take a look at our example research question, you can easily see that you need to measure the precision of the communicated location, as well as the time in which this is communicated. To find data, think along the lines of the material and equipment used, but also the standard operating procedures for such an incident, human behaviors, communication, etc. But bear in mind that you only have to collect the data you really need. For example, you do not need to measure the time it takes for the ambulance driver to get ready, since this is independent from the solution to be assessed. This helps you to use your resources more efficiently. Also, think about whether you are even capable of measuring the required data regarding your time and resources. If not, you will have to give priority to certain data and adjust your allocation of resources to this prioritization. You have to identify appropriate KPIs in all 3 performance measurement dimensions: the trial, the crisis management, and the solution dimension. Remember session 2.1. Have a look at the list of generic KPIs, which you can find in the trial guidance tool in session 5.1, and complete it with trial-specific measures. Now you know what to measure, the next question is how to measure this. Also, you have to define who collects the data and when it is collected. Of course, for all kinds of physical data, you can measure them in meters, liters, and so on. Like the precision of the communicated location, this would most likely be in meters. If we look at communication, it might be a bit more interesting. Here you can analyze the phone communication or the CENTAP data. This means, of course, if you want the phone communication for analysis, you have to log it during your trial. Here, the testbed technical infrastructure can be of help. See session 5.2 for further information on this. So, you can collect data through the testbed technical infrastructure and/or through observers during a specific session of the trial and in a given moment of the scenario. Another means to collect data is asking the user by using surveys or focus groups. Here you can collect direct feedback. Consider that data collection can concern ethical and legal issues. Prepare the relevant documents, such as informed consent sheets and non-disclosure agreements, before collecting. To get to your final destination, you have to map carefully all the information you need, bearing in mind the trial objectives. This map can then be used to evaluate the solution. And this leads us to the next step, selecting your evaluation approaches. But first, another tool that will help you out a lot in data collection is the so-called baseline. You already heard about it shortly in the Step 0 session 2.1. This baseline is the crisis management processes as used currently. So this as-is process includes the current crisis management roles, the current operational systems, also referred to as legacy tools, and the currently used ways of communication and standard operating procedures. But the baseline excludes the innovative solution you would like to assess in your trial. The baseline is focused on your gap, your trial context, and is the skeleton of your script or screenplay for the trial scenario. The aim of the baseline is to visualize your process, preferably as a kind of flowchart. It is a tool to discuss with your colleagues, to detail the very gap in your gap process, and also to help later on with the scenario. Check out session 5.4 for more details on how to analyze and draw out your baseline. After the baseline comes the so-called innovation line. The innovation line consists of your gap, your trial context, the scenario, and, you guessed it already, the new innovation solution. Hence, it is a depiction of the will-be process, as it visualizes the expected changes in the baseline due to introducing the solutions. It is useful for the data collection, as well as for your evaluation and solution selection later on. The goal of baseline and innovation line is to compare both processes. What comparing the baseline with the innovation line actually does for you is to showcase exactly those moments in the scenario where the innovation will bring change. Let's compare our example. The baseline is the basic 112 call. Conveying the exact location by voice communications is confusing. It is hard to describe the exact place via a normal phone call. Your solution is an app that directly sends the GPS data together with the call. How will this affect your process? And what kind of data should you collect to measure that? Getting the location without verbal description might save some time, so now time needs to be measured. The precision of the given location might be better with a GPS than with a verbal description and interpretation. So we need to measure the distance between estimated location and real location. Having a more exact location might help the ambulance driver to find the person in need more quickly. So again, time, but another kind. So you see, by comparing baseline and innovation line, you will easily identify KPIs and other relevant metrics. In the data collection plan step, your inputs are the trial objectives, research questions, list of generic KPIs, and the applied baseline. Your output will be a structured data collection plan. The methods for the data collection plan step are brainstorming and process modeling. The tools are Excel, flow diagram, CM taxonomy, trial guidance tool, observer support tool, and the trial action plan. The checklist for your data collection plan step is: determine what data is to be collected, determine measures and metrics, KPIs, determine how data will be collected, e.g. self-report methods, questionnaire, interviews, observations. Implement the data collection plan in the observer support tool. Data collection can concern ethical and legal issues. Consider this and prepare the relevant documents, such as informed consent sheets and non-disclosure agreements. We now come to step 4, the evaluation approaches. In a nutshell, the evaluation approach of your trial depends on the data collection plan and deals with making sense of the data through different techniques. When you know which data you need to collect, the next question is how to evaluate this data. The main question to decide on evaluation approaches is how are you going to make sense of the data? There are many different techniques for this. Every technique fits a certain kind of data you collect, of course. In general, we divide between quantitative and qualitative methods. Quantitative means that there is a quantity, so a numerical value, n for numerical. Millimeters, for instance, are a numerical value. But also, by analyzing the communication, you can come up with a numerical value. For example, the number of times the team on site had to ask for clarification, and the total time they communicated with each other. If you are looking for more in-depth information that can be better inferred through discussions, your evaluation should take into account more qualitative methods. Qualitative means non-standardized data, so no numerical values. Here, you do not look at the number of clarifications, but the causes. What did they ask for? Why? Was it a wrong term that was used, or was that term just not understood? If so, was the transmission bad, or was it pronounced wrong? What is important at this stage is the sense-making. While you still don't have a precise idea of how the data will look like, you should start thinking of advantages and disadvantages of specific techniques and tools. There are many different methods for both kinds of data, so for sure you'll find one that you like.
Episode 16. The Test Bed Technical Infrastructure. Because your technical colleague continuously talks about it, you were already aware, somewhere in the back of your brain, of the existence of the test bed technical infrastructure. What is this infrastructure exactly and how does it help us? You ask him at a dull moment during lunch. He starts to explain to you that next to the methodology, your organisation is offered the test bed technical infrastructure. In the preparations for your trial, it is your technical colleague who is dealing with this technical side of the supportive toolbox. He explains to you that the technical infrastructure consists of several software tools and datasets which are designed for setting up a realistic, controlled testing environment and which provides tools for data exchange, data collection and making observation. You know we have chosen, for good reasons, to focus on those few specific moments in time when decisions regarding evacuations are made, your colleague continues, and that only a few tactical and strategic commanders and crisis managers will participate and use the new solutions. Therefore, we need to stage, or call it to simulate, a setting in which we trigger exactly those decision moments, provide relevant information via the new solutions, and observe how these solutions are then being used and how they influence the decision-making. For this, we can use the testbed technical infrastructure very well. Episode 17. The Common Information Space and Common Simulation Space. First of all, with this infrastructure, innovative solutions can be connected with each other and even with currently used IT systems, such that they can exchange and use each other's data. In our case, flood prediction models must be fed with meteorological data, so a link between the currently used meteorological database and the innovative solutions must be established. We technicians call these data links the common information space. Your colleague also explains the infrastructure can be used to link up simulators with each other and with the solutions. That part of the infrastructure is called the common simulation space. In our case, a transport simulator is used to calculate how much time it takes to evacuate a specific area, given a set of resources. This data needs to be exact and realistic because we want to measure the time difference between working with or without the innovative solutions. Episode 18. The Trial Management Tool. Your technical coordinator continues. It is very important to keep track of the trial scenario and when each piece of information is given to trigger specific decision moments. For that, your team will use the Trial Management Tool. This tool holds a digital timeline of your trial scenario, consisting of one or more storylines filled with injects. This is very similar to the timetable you use during exercises. In this case, it will be filled with injects that will hopefully trigger the trial participants in making decisions regarding evacuation and thereby using the solutions. Injects are the pieces of information you as trial staff input to the participants, exactly how you present them with crisis management dilemmas during an exercise. Your technical coordinator adds, I will come back to you during the scenario formulation step about which injects to configure in the trial management tool. For now, it is important for you to know the trial management tool is linked with the observer support tool such that you can use reports sent in by the observers to keep track of the progress in the trial and activate applicable injects next. Episode 19. The Observer Support Tool. By now, lunch is over and your technical colleague walks with you to your office. He has more technical tools to offer. Halfway through the hallway, you bump into your colleague, who is the evaluation coordinator, and both she and your technical guy immediately start to talk about the Observer Support Tool. This Observer tool is a web-based application that can be used on tablets and that facilitates the data collection. All observers will use it to create observation reports according to pre-configured templates consisting of questions and checklists. All observations can be sent via internet and exported afterwards, so you can open them again in a software like Excel. Don't forget, you tell yourself, to check the internet connection as more and more participants and systems in the trial depend on it. Episode 20. The After Action Review Tool. Your technical colleague adds, the nice thing about linking up the solutions, the meteorological database, the transport simulator, the trial management tool and the observer support tool in using the testbed technical infrastructure is that the infrastructure logs every piece of data sent over it in the After Action Review tool. This tool, then, presents all data messages in a chronological overview. Filtering is possible as well as selecting individual items for more detail. This helps in getting a better insight in what happens during the trial, both when the trial is still ongoing and when evaluating it. The After Action Review tool also helps to collect and store all data in a structured way for evaluation. Episode 21. Technical Support and Open Source Availability. Now that your technical colleague has finished, your head is buzzing with new information. When he leaves your office, he turns around. Oh, and guess what? He states last. The testbed technical infrastructure is available online as open source software, so I can simply go to the GitHub repository, download the components and datasets we need, and implement it free of charge. But as it is the first time you and me work with it, we also need some technical support from the Centre of Expertise in getting it up and running. That was quite a long story of your technical coordinator, but you understood the core of it. The testbed technical infrastructure is packed with software applications meant to help you in organising the trial on a technical and practical level. That is the main point, and quite easy to remember.
In the evaluation approaches steps, your input is the data collection plan. Your output will be a list of techniques and tools for evaluation. The methods for the evaluation approaches step are brainstorming, quantitative and qualitative analysis techniques. The tools are the trial guidance tool, the CM taxonomy, the lessons learned library, and your trial action plan. The checklist for your evaluation approaches step is formulate KPIs and metrics, formulate targets per KPI and metric, match data with a specific evaluation approach, do a reality check, are the evaluation approaches feasible? To analyze and disseminate data or results can include various ethical and/or legal challenges. Identify these, e.g. via external consultations, and document how they are followed up. We now present the last two steps, the scenario formulation and the solution selection.
Episode 22, 6-step approach, scenario formulation. You think back to that first discussion at the coffee machine about the gap. You remember you already had a vague scenario in mind. For instance, the last exercise you ran, or the real flood that happened a few years ago. Now you must put it on paper. The best option is to start with a very simple scenario. Let's, for example, take the fictive city of Kazan, which is threatened by a flood. Excessive rainfall over an extended period of time causes the river Naru to exceed its capacity. Forecasts show that the dikes can overflow in the next few hours. So, that is it. That will do. You don't have to have a complete storyline like for an exercise. You can just have small pieces of the story that are not connected to one another, but which do reflect aspects of the gap. There is a large difference with a scenario for an exercise and the one for a trial. In a trial, the scenario does not focus on the right decision or to test the right behaviour according to the plan. The scenario should focus only on those points in time when the gap is experienced and include realistic situations when the solutions are used. Which information is needed to enable the participants to use and assess the solutions to their full extent. Don't make the trial more difficult or stressful by changing information or by too many injects with dynamic information. Let the participants work quietly and undisturbed on getting to know the solutions. Give them enough time to reflect and to find answers to their own operational questions. Remember, you are not assessing their performance, but are evaluating the solutions. On the other hand, there are also some similarities to an exercise. Injects, for example, are pieces of information given to the people within the trial to trigger specific behaviour. This can be a 112 call, or the simulated or real arrival of an ambulance. In order to create the scenario in which you feel the before-mentioned rock in your shoe, you have to think about those triggering events and create the injects you need. If you have decided on several rocks you want to get out of your shoe and identified the triggering events, you have two options. A. You can create a whole storyline that will lead you rock by rock, or B. You keep every rock on its own and create separate scenarios with time jumps in between. While the first option, A, might make it easier for your participants and role players to immerse themselves in the situation and thus create a very realistic testing environment, it can also create rather bold twists if your rocks do not really match each other. So the second option, B, can be favourable too. It's something to discuss with your colleagues and to decide on right now. They tell you, one rock in your shoe is annoying enough. Let's keep it simple. One storyline and just a handful of injects. You will tell the participants what the situation is, they'll use the solutions, and that is it. Episode 23. Configuring your scenario in the trial management tool. You think you are finished with your scenario, and you start to tell your colleagues about it during coffee. Through their detailed questions like, who is providing this information, or why do you need that inject? The feeling grows that you need to get a better control of the scenario flow. You remember that there is a tool that is part of the testbed technical infrastructure called the Trial Management Tool. The TMT could help you to control the activities of simulators, role players and observers by showing you a chronological overview of all storylines and injects you have prepared. Your scenario deals with the fact that you have a severe rain for several days, the water levels rise, and a flooding might start. In your scenario, role players start to activate the tactical and strategic commanders by calling in as water authority and reporting a dangerous rise of the river's water level. In the TMT, this input can be divided into small messages for simulators, role players and observers. In its interface, you add, for example, an inject for a simulator to start the flooding and an inject for a role player to call, playing the role of the head of the water authority. And you add an inject for an observer to watch out for a particular activity. This overview of injects will definitely help the trial director, the person who leads the trial and who is able to control the sequence of injects. To be able to execute your trial on a practical level, you have to further detail your scenario. You decided you can devote only one full day for it. As you want to finish the day with a focus group interview session and you have to start the day with a good briefing, you assume that the action part of it can take no longer than 5 hours. To achieve the results in such a short time frame, you decide to focus only on the exact moments when the gap emerges and when the solutions come to play. All other scenario elements, such as collecting and analysing different data sources, dispatching and reporting, are to be provided as a narrative via role-played information. By limiting the non-relevant activities, you allow the participants to focus on the gap-related processes and to assess the innovative solutions, if you can find one. Episode 24, 6-Step Approach, Solution Selection. Where to find relevant solutions to cover the gap you defined. Sometimes you hear some suggestions from your colleagues, also from other agencies and from across the border. You start with simply selecting some solutions you have heard of and you have seen in use at fellow crisis management organisations. You also use the Portfolio of Solutions website to search for tools stated to be applicable to your gap. But that are just options. Your aim is to publish your request to a wider circle. You have a look at the CMINE, which is a network of crisis management experts throughout Europe you just joined 1 month ago. You are very much aware of the fact that your trial committee has to be 100% objective when selecting solutions, else your procurement colleagues might face serious issue later on. But a call for applications or tender with blind review seems to be a bit overdone for the scale you are working on. And at this very moment, you suddenly understand why you did all the preparatory work, to be able to select promising solutions. The crisis management functions in the Portfolio of Solutions help you in getting a good overview of solutions that meet your gap. You act pragmatically, and you invite the solution providers from your shortlist of promising tools. You ask them whether they are interested in your trial and whether they would like to participate. 3 solution providers respond positively and demonstrate their solutions during a Skype meeting. You and your colleagues quickly decide that one of these solutions is not what you are looking for. It focuses too much on calculating the direct cost of deploying rescue vehicles, but in the core this does not help your strategic crisis managers to come up with an overall effective order of evacuation. The other 2 solutions are map-based situational overviews and include a flooding model. They both seem to have potential to bridge your gap, so you decide to select them both for your trial. You feel you are ready with the preparations. It's Friday afternoon, let's have a drink with your colleagues. They sigh with relief. They understand and fully appreciate all your thoughts and actions for this meticulous preparation. but they are ready for action, the real work.
Step 5. Scenario formulation. In a nutshell, your trial context gives you lots of opportunities to come up with a specific trial scenario. The scenario is dependent on different things: gaps, available practitioners, available facilities and equipment. You need to write a distinct scenario in the same way you would write a script for an exercise. Who does what, when, where, with what equipment? In other words, in which special situation do you want to face your gap? Think of this while choosing and selecting solutions. You know your gaps and in which trial context they appear. You also know what data you want to collect and how you want to evaluate it. Now you have to define when and where you want to have your trial. Also, you need to have an idea of whom and what you need and their availability. All this information has an impact on the formulation of the scenario. You have to pick a specific line of action based on the prerequisites identified before. So all those steps you have done up to now are unavoidable if you want to set up a trial. When formulating the scenario, everything comes together. Your first step is to revisit your gap and trial context. Refer to session 2.1 for this step 0. The trial context is already the bone structure of your scenario, the scenario skeleton, if you will. The whole aim of this scenario is to recreate the moment in time when you meet the gap you want to bridge. Then you look again on your trial objective and research questions, and the data collection plan you derived from those. What kind of flesh is needed on those trial context bones in order to create the exact scenario that will give you that data and KPIs you are craving for? By doing this, you approach your gaps from a different perspective. This is important when selecting innovative solutions. Only if you know in which situations you face your gap can you identify what kind of solution is needed. One more thing to be mindful of. When running a trial, you are staging a realistic but fictive crisis in which the use of the solutions is assessed. So, as we already hinted at, you have to deal with two worlds, a real world and a simulation world, and both determine the trial dimension of your setup. Within the real world, there is the location at which you run your trial. There is the hardware you use and the people who participate. And you run your trial on a real date and lasting a real time. Some of these things you can control. Other things like the weather and participants being stuck in traffic you cannot control. But you can think of backup plans and add contingency margins or buffers in your time schedule. The simulation world is fully under your control. You set the scenario used in the trial. You determine the time, date and location where the incident episodes play out. And if you do this well enough, just like during an exercise, your trial participants will be immersed in this fictive incident and will thus use the solutions as if they are used in a real crisis. On the other hand, if you cut corners here, choose a very rare scenario, or leave out critical use cases of a solution, you run the risk of assessing your solution in an unrealistic setting and thereby making the evaluation useless. So it is important to think about each step and always critically reflect on your own work. In the scenario formulation step, your input are the trial context, gaps, research question, and data collection plan. Your outputs will be a scenario script or storyboard. The methods for the scenario formulation step are brainstorming and screenplay writing. The tools are the trial guidance tool, observer support tool, and the trial action plan. The checklist for your scenario formulation step is: state key events of each gap clearly. Identify and write down triggering conditions and injects per key event. Identify roles and actions needed for key events. Combine key events with a conclusive storyline. Prepare injects to trigger the needed key events. Your scenario might touch upon sensitive topics, e.g. CBRNE or triage. Look up and consult available ethics guidelines, e.g. for CBRNE security or data protection, and integrate ethical considerations into the scenario from the onset. Consider if there are legal implications for the scenario chosen, or whether it can have negative societal impacts. The last step in the 6-step approach is to select one or more solutions. In a nutshell, depending whether the set of potential solutions is known or not, the length of the solution selection process can vary greatly. Once a potential set of solutions is found, The process consists of two tasks. The first task is to execute a practitioner-centered review of the solution itself. Here, you can make use of pre-assessment criteria developed by multidisciplinary CM practitioners. Once the reviews are finished, the whole TC can run the actual selection of the solutions, which includes also further trial-related considerations, like the relation to gaps or the requirements on the technical side. One important thing first, a solution is always socio-technical. What does that mean? It means that a tool never comes alone. There is always a user who brings his/her own values, beliefs, and standard operating procedures. 1. An example. If you give me, as a citizen of Central Europe, a car, I will drive on the right side of the road. If you give the same car to someone from Ireland, that person will drive it on the left side of the road. Now, if we by chance meet somewhere, we might crash. What this example wants to tell you is, every time you use a solution, you bring yourself to the table. You bring all your previous experience, knowledge, all the standard operating procedures, your beliefs about how something should or should not be, and so on. This influences the trial and your evaluation. This now leads to the question, what is a solution? It can be a tool or new piece of equipment that comes always with a training, a procedure, or a manual. For example, a new type of ambulance with a rope winch to get the stretcher inside the ambulance. Or it can be a software application that also comes with a manual and resources on your PC to run it. An example can be a common operational picture tool that elicits cooperation of different command staffs to solve an incident. A new procedure can be a solution as well. It comes with a training or executors. Let's say we put only 4 firefighters on a truck instead of 6. What changes? Even a role can be a solution. How would a social media manager change your situational awareness? Maybe someone already opened a Periscope before you have boots on the ground. Would you not like to see that via a live stream? And last but not least, a training that comes, of course, with instructors and training manuals can be a solution. Think about the positive impact a psycho-socio first aid course can have, not only for your volunteers, but also for your paid staff. To find such solutions, check out session 6.2 about the portfolio of solutions developed in the Driver Plus project, which is an online database full of such solutions. Where else to find solutions? Within your community. So put out the word that you need something, on fairs and trade shows, or the all-knowing internet. It is important that you find something that is actually promising to improve the current situation. Before you choose a solution, you should get a first impression by potential future users. For that, first ask the solution provider to answer the following questions in order to assess the fittingness to your needs. 1. Mission. How does the solution contribute to crisis management? 2. Integration. How is it integrated into the existing crisis management operations? 3. Readiness. How mature is the solution and has it been tested or proved? 4. Motivation. How does the solution address problems of practitioners? 5. References. Which references on solution application exist? You can optionally ask for the required resources and know-how to use the application, some technical specifications as well as the investment costs needed to deploy the solution. Once you've collected the answers, you should include the potential users, the CM practitioners, to ask them for a feedback, whether the solution sounds promising or not. This discussion can be supported by considering the following questions. 1. Can the solution be used to address the initial gap and to provide an answer to the main research question of the trial? 2. Is the solution provider able to provide an appropriate training so that potential end users can apply the solution in the trial? 3. Does the solution require special technical setup in order to be trialed? And is the technical testbed infrastructure able to fulfill them? 4. Is the solution provider willing and able to participate and contribute to the trial-related tasks and meetings? The final decision should be concluded within the discussion and communicated shortly after. In the solution selection step, your input are the trial context and gaps. Your output will be a list of selected solutions for the trial. The method for the solution selection is the solution selection process. The tools are the websites, especially the portfolio of solutions, a physical meeting, The solutions, of course, the infrastructure at the trial location, the CM taxonomy, and your trial action plan. The checklist for your solution selection step is: identify needed solution functionalities for closing the gap. Follow the solution selection process. Issue solution review. Finalize pre-selection. Hold solution demonstration meeting. Agree upon solution selection within the trial committee. Agree with solution provider on terms of participation in a trial. Carry out a societal impact assessment, SIA, on the chosen solutions. Identify and follow up on potential legal or ethics issues relating to the use of the solutions, e.g., use of tweets. These were the single steps. Additionally, there are tools that can help you with the 6-step approach. We have the Trial Guidance tool that does exactly what its name suggests. It will guide you through the preparation phase. And there is the Trial Action Plan, a great documentation tool that will make sure you do not forget anything on your way from preparation to execution to evaluation. Session 5.1 provides you with tutorials about these two tools. As stated before, the technical infrastructure can support you in collecting data. Check out Session 5.2 for detailed information about this testbed technical infrastructure. Information on the creation of baseline and innovation line can be found in Session 5.4. Furthermore, you are not alone. There is a whole network to support you. Check out Session 6.1 and get in touch with others. As seen in the last step, information on the portfolio of solutions can be found in Session 6.2. Finally, as explained at the beginning of this session, know that the TGM and especially the 6-step approach is an iterative process. We will get further into detail in Session 2.3. This is the end of Session 2.2. Thank you for your attention.